The quiet of deep space was broken by a series of urgent beeps on the main deck of the Galactic Coalition patrol ship, Vigilance. Captain Reed, a tall blue-skinned being with 4 eyes that could see across multiple light spectrums, jerked his head up from the report he was reading. "Report," he ordered, his voice calm despite the warning lights now flashing across his control panel. Officer Tim, seated at the scanner station, spoke quickly. "Unknown vessel detected at the edge of Sector 7, Captain. It's giving off very strange readings." Reed moved to stand behind Tim, looking at the screen with growing concern. The readings were indeed unusual. Heat signatures far beyond normal levels for a functioning ship, particulate matter trailing behind the vessel, chemical compositions that matched no known friendly species technology. "Is it under attack?" Reed asked, his secondary eyes narrowing to focus on the details. "No weapon signatures detected," Tem replied, her 4 hands moving rapidly over the controls. "But these emissions, I've never seen anything like this. The ship appears to be burning from the inside." Reed's skin paled to a lighter blue. In the 300 years of Galactic Coalition space travel, fire aboard ships had become nearly unheard of. Modern materials simply didn't burn. Fire suppression technology had advanced to the point where even the idea of flames on a starship was the stuff of horror stories told to scare young cadets. "Send emergency alert to Coalition headquarters," Reed commanded. "Unknown vessel in distress. Possible catastrophic system failure with internal combustion. Request immediate assistance." Within minutes, the response came back. 3 additional Coalition ships were being diverted to their location. Emergency medical teams were being assembled. Fire suppression units were being prepped. "The ship is maintaining a steady course," Tem reported with surprise. "If they're experiencing a fire of this magnitude, their navigation systems should be compromised." Reed studied the trajectory. "They're heading directly toward Coalition space. Maybe they're making a desperate run for help." The ship's communication officer, Marn, suddenly straightened in his seat. "Captain, the unknown vessel is transmitting." "Put it through," Reed ordered, bracing himself for distress calls or fragmented emergency messages. Instead, a calm, clear voice came through the speakers. "Coalition patrol vessel, this is Captain Miller of the Earth ship Prometheus. We notice you've been tracking us for the past 20 minutes. Is there a problem?" The bridge crew of the Vigilance exchanged confused looks. The voice sounded completely untroubled. "This is Captain Reed of the Coalition patrol ship Vigilance. We've detected serious anomalies aboard your vessel. Are you aware your ship is showing signs of internal combustion?" There was a pause, then what sounded strangely like laughter. "Oh, that. Yes. Everything's fine, Captain Reed. We're just preparing the evening meal. First night of our journey, so we're having a bit of a celebration." Reed blinked all 4 eyes in succession, a sign of extreme confusion among his species. "Preparing meal? With fire?" he asked, his translator possibly malfunctioning. "Yes, we've got the grill going in, the mess hall. Chef's special tonight. Actual flame-broiled burgers, not those synthesized things. We also have a few science experiments running that require controlled combustion. Standard procedure." The bridge of the Vigilance fell silent. Reed looked at his science officer Dale, who appeared just as baffled. "Your species deliberately creates fire inside your vessels?" Dale asked, unable to keep the horror from his voice. "Well, sure," Captain Miller replied casually. "Humans have been cooking with fire for about 1,000,000 years. Hard habit to break. Our ships are designed for it." By this time, the 3 emergency response vessels had arrived, surrounding the human ship in standard rescue formation. The lead, rescue ship Mercy, was already deploying boarding shuttles filled with fire suppression teams in full hazard gear. Reed quickly opened a channel to all ships. "Hold your positions. This may be a first contact situation with unknown protocols." Back to the human captain, Reed spoke carefully. "Captain Miller, our sensors indicate temperatures in several sections of your ship that would be fatal to most Coalition species. Are you certain your crew is safe?" There was that strange sound again, laughter. "Quite safe, Captain Reed. Humans are very heat tolerant, and the cooking areas are well ventilated. Would you like to come aboard and see for yourself? We have Plenty of food to share. Reed hesitated. Coalition protocol demanded investigation of any potential hazard near their borders, but boarding a ship with active fires went against every safety regulation in the book. I accept your invitation, Reed finally said, but I must bring safety officers and medical personnel. Bring whoever you like, Miller replied cheerfully. Docking Bay 3 is open for you. 30 minutes later, Reed led a team of 10 Coalition officers, all wearing full environmental protection suits, through the airlock of the human ship. They were met by Captain Miller, a surprisingly small being with light brown skin and only 2 eyes, wearing nothing more protective than what she called a uniform. Welcome aboard the Prometheus, Miller said, with a gesture Reed's translator identified as friendly. Sorry for the confusion. We weren't informed that open flames would cause such alarm. All flames cause alarm in space, Reed said stiffly. Fire consumes oxygen and produces toxic gases. It damages systems and kills crew. Miller nodded. For us, controlled fire is a tool. Let me show you. She led the nervous Coalition team through corridors that seemed remarkably normal, despite the alarming readings on their environmental sensors. When they reached what Miller called the galley, Reed almost ordered an immediate evacuation. In an open area, visible behind safety glass, a human was standing before a metal surface that glowed with actual flames. The human was turning pieces of what appeared to be organic matter directly over these flames. Nearby, another human was manipulating a device that heated water to the point of visible steam. That's our chef Tom grilling the burgers I mentioned, Miller explained casually. And over there is our coffee station, essential for human functioning, especially during early shift. Dale, the science officer, was frantically taking readings. Captain Reed, he whispered. These humans are deliberately exposing protein-rich organic material to temperatures that cause chemical changes, and then they appear to be planning to consume it. You mean they're going to eat things they put in fire? Reed asked, his voice faint. Miller grinned. We call it cooking, and we've been doing it since before we had spaceflight. Would you like to try some? Tom makes the best burgers in the fleet. Reed looked at the flames, then at the calm humans moving around them as if standing next to certain death was completely normal. In that moment, he realized this first contact was going to be far more complicated than anyone in the Coalition could have imagined. I think, Reed said slowly, we need to talk about your species' relationship with fire. Captain Reed and his team stood frozen in the doorway of the human ship's galley. The sight of open flames aboard a spacecraft went against everything they had been taught since their earliest training days. Perhaps we should continue this conversation elsewhere, Reed suggested, his voice tight with stress. Somewhere without active burning. Captain Miller looked puzzled but nodded. Of course. The conference room is just down the hall, but the burgers will be ready in about 10 minutes, if you'd like to stay. As they walked, Reed noticed his science officer Dale was still taking readings with a handheld scanner, his eyes wide with fascination and horror. Captain, Dale whispered, their environmental systems are filtering the combustion byproducts at an impressive rate, and the fire is contained within designated areas with multiple safety systems. Reed glanced back toward the galley. You mean they've engineered their ships to accommodate fire? Deliberately? It appears so, Dale said. Fascinating and terrifying at the same time. The conference room was mercifully free of flames. The Coalition officers sat stiffly in their protective suits while Captain Miller and her first officer, a tall man named Adams, sat comfortably across from them. I understand this must be quite a shock, Miller said, leaning forward with her elbows on the table. Our briefings mentioned that Coalition species had moved away from combustion technology, but we didn't realize it would cause such alarm. Moved. Away? Reed's translator struggled to convey his tone of disbelief. Open flame has been banned on all Coalition vessels for over 200 years. It's considered as dangerous as a hull breach. Adams, the first officer, looked surprised. Really? No cooking with fire? No candles? No fireplaces in the recreation areas? Fire places. Dale repeated the unfamiliar term, his scanner nearly dropping from his hand. You create dedicated locations for fire? Miller smiled. On Earth, our home planet, many homes still have fireplaces. They're mostly for comfort and tradition now, but they were essential for thousands of years. Humans gathered around fires for warmth, protection, and community. Reed's skin shifted to a pale blue, indicating deep confusion. Your species evolved with fire. We did more than evolve with it, Adams explained. We mastered it. Some scientists believe controlling fire is what made humans, well, human. It changed how we ate, how we socialized, even how our brains developed. At that moment, the door slid open and a human crew member entered carrying a tray. On it were several flat, round objects that emitted a strong aroma. The coalition officers tensed, their protective suits automatically sealing completely closed. I thought you might be hungry, Captain Miller said. These are the burgers I mentioned. Beef patties cooked over an open flame, served on bread with various toppings. Reed stared at the food with equal parts curiosity and horror. And you? Eat this food that has been deliberately exposed to fire? It tastes better that way, the crew member said simply, setting down the tray. The flame creates flavors you can't get from a food synthesizer. Dale had directed his scanner toward the food. Captain Reed, the chemical composition of these items has been significantly altered by the heating process. New compounds have formed that weren't in the original materials. That's the point, Miller said. We call it the Maillard reaction. It creates hundreds of new flavor compounds. It's why grilled food tastes different from boiled food. The word different hardly seemed adequate to Reed. His species, like most in the coalition, had been eating synthesized or minimally processed foods for generations. The idea of deliberately causing chemical reactions in food through extreme heat was primitive, dangerous, and yet these humans seemed not just comfortable with it but enthusiastic. There are other uses of controlled fire on your vessel? Reed asked cautiously. Miller nodded. Several of our science labs use combustion in experiments. Our ceremonial area has candles for various human traditions. And of course, there's the coffee machines, tea kettles, and other heating elements in personal quarters. Reed's 4 eyes blinked in sequence again. You allow individual crew members to create fire in their private spaces? With proper safety protocols, yes, Adams said. Most quarters have small heating elements for beverages. Some crew members even have permission to burn incense for religious or meditation purposes. Dale was frantically taking notes. Captain Reed, this suggests a fundamental difference in how humans interact with their environment. They don't just tolerate fire, they incorporate it into daily life, science, and even spiritual practices. One of the medical officers who had remained silent until now spoke up. How do you prevent casualties? Fire consumes oxygen, creates toxic gases, and damages tissue on contact. Captain Miller's expression grew more serious. We take fire safety very seriously. Every human child is taught about fire safety from a young age. Our ships have extensive suppression systems, compartmentalization, and sensors far more sensitive than most vessels. Fire is a tool we respect, not something we fear. Reed considered this. The concept was so alien to him that he struggled to find the right questions to ask. In coalition training, fire was presented as an unmitigated disaster, something to be prevented at all costs. But these humans spoke of it almost as a companion species. I would like to observe your fire safety protocols, Reed finally said, and document how you coexist with this element. Captain Miller smiled. Of course, we'd be happy to show you. In fact, if you're comfortable with it, we're planning a small celebration tonight. One of our crew members has a birthday and human tradition includes small controlled flames on a sweet food item we call cake. The coalition officers exchanged alarmed glances, their protective suits whirring softly as environmental controls adjusted to their stress levels. You deliberately set food on fire, for celebration purposes? Reed asked. Just small candles, Adams explained. The birthday person makes a wish and blows them out. It's harmless. The medical officer's voice was faint. You encourage blowing. Air onto flames, wouldn't that spread the fire? That's the point, Miller said with a laugh. To extinguish them. Reed sat back in his chair, feeling overwhelmed. What had begun as an emergency response to a potential disaster had become a first contact scenario unlike any in Coalition records. These humans didn't just tolerate danger, they celebrated it, cooked with it, even blew air at it for fun. I believe, Reed said slowly, that we need to update our species' interaction protocols. Humans appear to have a unique relationship with elements that other species consider hazardous. Miller nodded, looking pleased. We've found that's often the case when we meet new species. What's dangerous to one can be essential to another. Would you like to try a burger? Your suit should be able to analyze it for compatibility with your biology. Reed looked at the strange food, browned by actual fire, sitting innocently on the table. It represented everything the Coalition had moved beyond centuries ago. And yet, these humans had built starships advanced enough to reach Coalition space, while still cooking their food over flames. Perhaps, Reed said carefully, there are some old ways that still have value. He reached for the burger, initiating his suit's external object handling protocol, and wondered what other surprises these flame-loving humans might have in store. Word traveled fast in Coalition space. By the time the human ship Prometheus was escorted to Orbital Station 7, the largest Coalition outpost in the sector, nearly every official had heard about the fire-using aliens. The docking procedures took 3 times longer than normal. Station safety officers insisted on special containment fields and emergency teams standing by. Captain Miller and her crew found the extra precautions amusing, but cooperated fully. Are they always this nervous? Adams asked as they waited in the airlock. Miller shrugged. Remember how the Martian colonists reacted when we first showed them actual soil gardening? Some species just get set in their ways. When the airlock finally opened, they were greeted by a delegation of high-ranking Coalition officials. At the front stood Station Director Brill, a tall, thin being with silvery skin that reflected the station lights. Welcome to Orbital Station 7, Director Brill said formally. We have prepared special quarters for your stay that should accommodate your unusual requirements. Captain Miller smiled politely. Thank you, Director. We're looking forward to establishing good relations with the Coalition. Yes, well, Brill said, looking uncomfortable. There are certain matters we must discuss first. If you would follow me to the conference room. The conference room was large, with a long table surrounded by representatives from various Coalition species. Captain Miller, Adams, and Human Ambassador Jones took seats on one side. Director Brill and the station's security chief, Naven, sat directly across from them. Let me be direct, Brill began. Your cooking and heating practices present a significant safety concern for our station and all Coalition vessels. Ambassador Jones nodded. Captain Reed informed us of your concerns. We understand that Coalition species have moved away from using open flame technology. Moved away? Security Chief Naven's voice was sharp. We eliminated it completely. It's a Level 1 prohibited technology, alongside biological weapons and unshielded radiation sources. The humans exchanged surprised glances. That seems extreme, Ambassador Jones said carefully. Fire is a basic tool for humanity. We've been using controlled flames for cooking, heating, and cultural practices for our entire history. A science officer at the far end of the table spoke up. Our records indicate your species only achieved spaceflight in the last few centuries. Yet you've maintained these primitive combustion practices. Miller tried to hide her annoyance at the word primitive. We've refined and improved our relationship with fire, not abandoned it. Our ships have the most advanced fire safety systems in our fleet's history. Director Brill slid a data tablet across the table. These are Coalition safety regulations regarding prohibited technologies. Section 37.2 clearly states that no open flame is permitted on any vessel or station under any circumstances. Ambassador Jones picked up the tablet and scanned it quickly. I see. However, as non-members of the Coalition, we operate under our own safety protocols, and those protocols have proven extremely effective. Not the point, Security Chief Naven said firmly. While in Coalition space, all vessels must comply with Coalition safety standards. A tense silence fell over the room. The humans had traveled a great distance to establish diplomatic relations with the coalition, but giving up cooking with fire would be asking them to abandon a fundamental part of their culture. Perhaps a compromise, Ambassador Jones suggested. What if we restrict cooking and other flame activities to our ship only? When visiting your stations or vessels, we'll respect your regulations. Director Brill's silvery skin rippled with what seemed to be frustration. That still leaves your vessel as a potential hazard in our space. A hazard? Captain Miller couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Our ship has traveled through 3 star systems without incident. We've had exactly 0 fire-related emergencies in the 5 years since Prometheus was launched. That's not the point, another coalition official said. The mere presence of intentional combustion within our jurisdiction creates unacceptable risk. Ambassador Jones leaned forward. With respect, what exactly are you asking? That we shut down our kitchens, our science labs? That we change our entire way of life to visit your space? Yes, Director Brill said simply. That would be the safest option. The human delegation was stunned into silence. It was one thing to be told their practices were unusual, quite another to be asked to abandon them completely. Captain Miller stood up slowly. Perhaps we should take some time to consider our options. This is clearly a more significant cultural difference than we anticipated. As the humans left the conference room, the coalition officials remained, talking in low voices about the dangerous aliens and their bizarre attachment to creating fire in enclosed spaces. Back on the Prometheus, the human crew gathered in the mess hall, ironically around the very grills and cooking stations that had caused the problem. They're seriously expecting us to give up cooking? Chef Tom asked, flipping a steak on the grill. The sizzling sound and rich aroma filled the room. That's not happening. Ambassador Jones sighed. We need to find some middle ground. The coalition represents 17 spacefaring species and controls most of the trading routes in this sector. We can't just write them off. Adams was reviewing the safety regulations on a tablet. Their fear of fire goes beyond reasonable caution. It's almost religious, like they see fire as some kind of evil force. That might not be far off, Miller said. Dale, the science officer from the Vigilance, told me that several coalition species evolved on planets with naturally occurring fire hazards, forest fires, volcanic activity, that sort of thing. They never learned to control fire because they were too busy running from it. Ambassador Jones considered this. So while humans were sitting around campfires telling stories, their ancestors were fleeing from flames and terror. No wonder they don't understand our relationship with it. So what do we do? Adams asked. Shut down our kitchens and eat their synthesized food while we're here? No, Miller said firmly. We find a way to show them that controlled fire isn't just safe, it's valuable. We need to change their perspective. The discussion was interrupted by a sudden blaring alarm. Red emergency lights began flashing throughout the ship. What now? Miller muttered, moving to the comm panel on the wall. Bridge report. The voice of the duty officer came through, sounding concerned. Captain, we're receiving an emergency broadcast from the station. They're experiencing some kind of major systems failure. Power outages across multiple sections. Miller looked back at her officers, a grim smile forming on her face. Well, Ambassador, you wanted to demonstrate human value to the coalition. I think we just got our chance. What are you thinking, Captain? Jones asked. I'm thinking, Miller replied, that a station without power might appreciate some people who know how to create light and heat the old-fashioned way. As they rushed to gather emergency supplies, Chef Tom carefully shut down his grill, not knowing that the cooking fire he was extinguishing would soon make humans the most valuable allies in the darkened station. Darkness fell over Orbital Station 7 like a heavy blanket. Emergency lights flickered weakly for a few seconds, then died completely. The temperature began to drop almost immediately as the environmental systems failed. Inside the station's control center, Director Brill and his staff moved in confused panic. Their species had excellent night vision, but the complete absence of light still triggered deep instinctual fears. Status report, Brill demanded, his voice higher than normal. Primary and secondary power systems have failed, someone reported from the darkness. Backup systems are not responding. Environmental controls are offline. Estimated temperature dropped to dangerous levels within 2 hours. How is this possible? Brill asked. Triple redundant systems don't just fail simultaneously. Security Chief. Haven's voice came from near the door. We're getting reports of panic in the residential sections. Many species are not handling the darkness well. This was an understatement. Several coalition species had evolved on planets with constant daylight or lived in shallow waters where darkness never reached. Complete darkness triggered profound terror in their brains. We need to restore power immediately, Brill ordered. Contact all engineering teams. Communications are down, came the reply. Internal comms are operating on emergency batteries only, and those will fail within the hour. The situation was rapidly becoming a disaster. Without power, the station would become uninhabitable. Without light, many species would be paralyzed by fear. Without heat, cold-sensitive species would begin to die. A voice spoke from the doorway. Director Brill, this is Captain Miller of the Prometheus. We'd like to help. Brill turned toward the sound. Captain, how did you find the control center in this darkness? Humans evolved as a species that was active during both day and night, Miller explained, stepping into the room. We're comfortable in darkness when necessary, and we brought these. Suddenly, a warm glow filled the room. The humans had brought handheld lights, not the cold blue emergency lights of coalition technology, but warm yellow flames enclosed in glass containers. Are those fires? Naven asked, his voice a mix of horror and fascination. Lanterns, Miller corrected. Controlled flames in contained environments. Been using them for thousands of years during power outages on Earth. The coalition officials stared at the gentle flames. The dancing light cast soft shadows around the room, but instead of making things more frightening, it somehow made the darkness less absolute, less terrifying. We've brought similar lighting to other key areas of the station, Ambassador Jones explained, stepping forward, and we're setting up temporary heating centers in the main gathering spaces. Heating centers? Brill repeated. Portable heating devices, Miller said. Some electric running on our ship's batteries, others using safe combustion methods. We can keep critical areas warm enough for survival until power is restored. Brill and Naven exchanged glances, visible now in the warm light from the human lanterns. You were prepared for this kind of emergency? Naven asked suspiciously. Adams shook his head. Not specifically, but humans have dealt with power outages throughout our history. We maintain certain traditional technologies as backups. Captain Reed from the Vigilance thought our fire practices were primitive, but sometimes the simple solutions are the most reliable. Brill seemed to struggle with the idea. His entire career had been built around following coalition safety protocols, and yet here were these humans, bringing the very thing he feared, fire, into his station, and it was providing light and comfort rather than destruction. Very well, he said finally. What do you need from us? We need your people to stay calm, Miller said, and we need to know which areas of the station house species most vulnerable to cold. With the immediate crisis of darkness addressed, the humans set to work. Crews from the Prometheus moved through the station, setting up simple heating stations in key locations. They used portable cooking stoves, chemical heat packs, and even small controlled fire pits in areas with proper ventilation. In the main medical bay, Dr. West from the Prometheus worked alongside Coalition Medical Officer Bennett to identify species with the greatest vulnerability to cold. These flame heat sources, Bennett said, watching humans set up a heating station, they're so basic, yet effective. Humans have been huddling around fires for warmth since before we built cities, West explained. There's something deeply comforting about it that goes beyond the physical heat. In the central gathering hall, Chef Tom had set up several cooking stations. The warm glow of controlled flames drew frightened station residents like moths to light. Many coalition species, who had never seen fire except in emergency training videos, now found themselves drawn to its warmth and light. What is that smell? Asked a young coalition member. their forearms wrapped tightly around themselves. "Hot chocolate," Tom answered, stirring a pot over a portable stove. An Earth comfort drink, warm, sweet, and surprisingly effective at improving morale during emergencies. As the hot drinks were passed around, the tension in the room visibly decreased. Species that had been taught to fear fire their entire lives were now sitting near it, accepting its warmth, even finding comfort in its presence. In the engineering section, Adams worked with station engineers to diagnose the power failure. The humans' comfort with working by lantern light proved invaluable, as coalition engineers struggled in the unfamiliar conditions. "Your people seem very calm during this crisis," one engineer commented. Adams shrugged. "Power outages happen. Humans are good at adapting to temporary setbacks, and we're also good at finding comfort in difficult situations. That's part of why we kept using fire even after we had cleaner technologies. There's something about a flame that speaks to something deep in the human spirit." 6 hours into the crisis, with the station's temperature stabilized by human heating methods and the panic eased by the warm light, a team of engineers finally identified the source of the power failure, a cascading system error triggered by an unexpected solar flare. In the control center, Director Brill had been watching the humans work with growing fascination. These beings who deliberately created fire on their ships had turned what the Coalition considered a deadly threat into a life-saving resource. "Your methods are unorthodox," Brill admitted to Captain Miller as they reviewed the station's status. "But I cannot deny their effectiveness in this situation." Miller smiled. "Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most reliable. Humanity never abandoned fire because we learned to see it as a tool, not just a danger." As the emergency lights finally flickered back to life, powered by jury-rigged systems, Brill looked around at the lanterns the humans had brought. Their warm glow now seemed almost friendly compared to the harsh blue emergency lighting. "Perhaps," Brill said slowly, "there are some old ways that deserve reconsideration." Miller nodded. "Fire can be dangerous, yes, but so can any powerful tool. The key isn't to ban it, but to respect it and learn to use it properly." As power gradually returned to the station, section by section, many Coalition members found themselves strangely reluctant to see the human lanterns extinguished and the heating stations dismantled. Something about the dancing flames had awakened old, forgotten instincts. Memories of ancestors who had once, long ago, gathered around fires for warmth and protection before technology had made such practices unnecessary. And perhaps some began to wonder unnecessary didn't always mean without value. 2 days after the power crisis, Orbital Station 7 had returned to normal operations. The Coalition engineering teams had restored all systems, repaired the damage from the solar flare, and added new safeguards to prevent similar failures in the future. But something had changed on the station. The atmosphere was different. The way Coalition members looked at the human visitors had shifted. In the main conference room, the Coalition Council had reconvened. This time, however, the meeting had none of the tension of their previous encounter. Director Brill sat at the head of the table, with Captain Miller and Ambassador Jones to his right. "The Council has reviewed the events of the recent emergency," Brill began formally, "and we wish to express our official gratitude to the crew of the Prometheus for their assistance during the crisis." Miller nodded politely. "We were happy to help, Director." "More than help," another council member added. "Your quick action and unconventional methods saved lives, particularly among our cold-sensitive species." Ambassador Jones smiled. "Humans have a long history of adapting to emergencies. Fire has been one of our most valuable tools in that regard." Brill cleared his throat. "Yes, about that. The Council has been discussing your fire practices. We have reviewed our safety regulations regarding open flame aboard vessels and stations." The humans waited, expecting another lecture about safety protocols. "We would like to learn more," Brill continued, surprising them. "About how humans safely manage fire in space environments." Captain Miller blinked in surprise. "You want us to teach you about fire safety?" "Not just safety," Brill said, "but also applications. Many species reported finding the warmth and light from your heating methods more comforting than our standard emergency systems. Security Chief Navin added. Several medical officers noted reduced stress levels among patients who were near your lanterns during the crisis. There appears to be some psychological benefit we had not considered. This was a remarkable shift. Just days ago, these same officials had been horrified by the very idea of fire aboard their station. Now they were talking about psychological benefits. We would be happy to demonstrate our methods, Miller said. Perhaps we could start with something simple like our cooking techniques. Yes, Brill agreed. A practical demonstration would be most informative. And so began what the humans would later call the Great Coalition Cookout. Chef Tom and his team set up cooking stations in one of the station's largest gathering spaces. With proper ventilation established and safety measures in place, they began to demonstrate human cooking techniques to fascinated Coalition observers. The key to fire safety, Tom explained to a group of Coalition engineers, isn't eliminating fire completely. It's understanding how it works, respecting its power, and containing it properly. He showed them how human cooking stations were designed with multiple redundant safety features, how fire suppression systems worked, how humans had learned to control flames rather than fear them. But the real breakthrough came when Coalition members began to taste the food. This is extraordinary, a Coalition scientist said after trying a grilled vegetable that was compatible with their biology. The flavors are completely different from synthesized food. That's the Maillard reaction I mentioned earlier, Adams explained. The chemical changes that occur during cooking create flavor compounds that can't be perfectly replicated by food synthesizers. Throughout the day, more Coalition members gathered to watch the demonstrations. Medical Officer Bennett had set up a station to monitor physiological responses to the cooked food among different species. Fascinating, Bennett reported to Captain Miller. Many species are showing positive neurological responses to both the aroma and flavor of fire-cooked foods, similar to responses we see with comfort stimuli. Miller smiled. Humans have known that for thousands of years. There's something primal about food cooked over flame that connects to something deep inside us. By evening, Captain Reed from the Vigilance had arrived at the station. He approached Miller with what his species considered a smile. "It seems your dangerous habits have found some admirers," Reed said, gesturing to where several Coalition officials were cautiously attempting to cook under Tom's supervision. "Not dangerous when properly respected," Miller replied. "Just different from what you're used to." Reed nodded. "I've been reviewing historical data. Most Coalition species abandoned fire use very early in their technological development. We never went through the thousands of years humans spent mastering it." "Different evolutionary paths," Miller agreed. "You developed other technologies instead." "Yes, but perhaps we lost something in the process," Reed admitted. "The crisis showed that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable." 1 week later, the council reconvened for a formal announcement. Director Brill stood at the podium looking both serious and slightly uncomfortable. After careful consideration and extensive safety reviews, Brill announced, the Coalition Council has approved a new exception to our safety regulations. Under the classification of human cultural practices, controlled fire use will be permitted in designated areas of Coalition space, subject to strict safety protocols and training requirements. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was unprecedented, the first exception ever granted to the fire prohibition in 200 years of Coalition history. Furthermore, Brill continued, we are announcing the establishment of a cultural exchange program between humans and Coalition species. The first course offerings will include Introduction to Cooking with Fire and Emergency Survival Techniques. Captain Miller and Ambassador Jones exchanged pleased glances. This was far more than they had hoped for when they first entered Coalition space. 6 months later, the Prometheus returned to Orbital Station 7 after completing a diplomatic tour of several Coalition worlds. As they docked, Miller couldn't help but notice the changes. The station now featured a large, specially designed Earth Cultural Center with proper ventilation and safety systems. Inside, several cooking stations were in use, with Coalition members working alongside human instructors. Captain Reed met them at the airlock, his skin a cheerful bright blue. Welcome back, Captain Miller, he said. Thank you, Captain Reed, Miller replied. I see things have changed since our last visit. Reed made a gesture of agreement. Indeed. I've been taking the cooking classes myself. I've found I have something of a talent for it. Really? Miller raised an eyebrow in surprise. Yes, Reed said with pride. I've become particularly skilled at what you call grilling. There's something satisfying about mastering the control of flame. As they walked through the station, Miller noticed other changes too. Many personal quarters now featured small heating elements for beverages. Some gathering spaces had contained fire features that reminded her of the fireplaces humans had used for centuries. In the main dining hall, they found Chef Tom working alongside a coalition chef. They were teaching a class on combining human cooking techniques with coalition ingredients. Our star student, Tom said, gesturing to a familiar face. It was the formerly terrified coalition officer who had first boarded the Prometheus expecting to find a ship in catastrophic failure. Now he was carefully turning pieces of food over, an open flame, his 4 eyes focused with concentration instead of fear. It's a matter of perspective, Reed explained as they watched. What was once seen as a primitive danger is now understood as a valuable cultural practice with practical applications. Miller smiled. Fire has always been that way for humans. Dangerous when feared, valuable when respected. As they joined the cooking class, Miller reflected on how far they had come. What had begun as an emergency response to a supposed disaster had become a bridge between cultures. The humans had brought more than just their technology to the coalition. They had brought an ancient relationship with a fundamental force of nature, one that many species had abandoned too quickly in their rush toward technological advancement. Sometimes, Miller thought as she watched coalition members and humans cooking side by side, the oldest traditions have the most to teach us about being alive in the universe. And sometimes what looks like a fire on a starship is just humans being human.